much to everyone who's watching this video today. On the call today, you have myself, Roxanne Boyes, the Sustainable Business Strategy Director for dentsu SSA. And you also have Tim Christopherson, which is a very, very special guest today because he is the head of Nature for Climate at UNEP. And we're going to be having a really interesting discussion today looking at that industry sector versus our own. And thank you so much for joining us, Tim. I'm not sure if you want to add a little bit to the intro that I made and tell us a little bit about your experience, how many years you've been in the industry, and what you're up to at the moment.
Thank you, Roxanne. It's a pleasure to be here. Indeed, I coordinate our work on Nature for Climate at UN Environment Program. I'm also the coordinator for the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is a global coordinated effort to repair some of the damage we've done to the planet and prevent further degradation of ecosystems worldwide. I've been in this. Been with the UN for 15 years, and before that, working for government and the European Commission.
Wow, it's quite an extensive CV. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm just going to go straight into the questions because we have so many things that we want to ask you. And starting off, I wanted to ask quite a bold and quite a big question in terms of, you have spent about over 10 years working at the UN. You spent over 20 years working in the environmental sector, and you have a wealth of knowledge and you've seen a lot over your time. And at this point, we've started moving away from speaking about the climate crisis and we're speaking about the generation of restoration, which is a phenomenal shift in itself. We're looking at the future with hope for the first time in a long time, I think, for the general public. And we're starting to believe that there is definitely a bright future ahead of us if we can just continue on the path that we're on. And there is a sense of positivity in the air. And I wanted to ask you that if we were to actualize this vision that we're starting to really picture and this vision that we're really going for with the 2030 goals, within the context of Africa, on ground, what would you say are the biggest areas of focus for us to really hit that vision and hit that goal in the next decade, during this, what we like to call the decade of action?
So Africa is, of course, a special continent in the context that it has the fastest growing population, the largest young population. In the context of ecosystems, it is also the place where over half of all ecosystem restoration commitments have been made. So if we combine all those mega trends, one thing that is clear is that we have to look at activities that create millions of jobs for young people across Africa. The only sector that can really provide those jobs in a relatively short term is the agriculture and food sector right now. If you also look across all of Africa, not only at the urban centers, but also how to ensure that there's social cohesion in Africa from the urban to the rural areas. So we definitely have to look at the future of food, of agriculture, of supply chains. How do we support smallholder farmers to make a profit, make a good living, restore the land, and aggregate what they produce up to a supply chain that makes sense for big companies that need stable, long-term agricultural supply chains. So this is at the moment our focus. How do we ensure a green economy for Africa, decent green jobs for the millions of people who are entering the job market every month?
Thank you. So in terms of the main areas that can make the most significant change, we know that the food sector is definitely one of those industries. And if we think about a number of companies in terms of how they get their inputs and their resources, this is really a key part of their value chain and their supply chain and how they make these decisions. And we know that there are a number of different startups, like Twiga Foods, for example, in Nairobi, Kenya, that are obviously really revolutionizing the space in different ways. We also have different projects in terms of agroforestry. But what about, when it comes to even the soil and all of these different aspects that will help that system? I know that that's a whole different, there's a whole different discussion. And if we really get into the topic, it can be really overwhelming and quite complex. And so maybe let's focus on that section for now. And And I know that a lot of people on this call and just in general are quite overwhelmed by these topics. Like you said, Africa's quite a unique case. It's got a number of different aspects that need to be considered, and the tasks are big. And from a UN perspective, what are some of the big projects that you're currently working on at the moment across the continent that you think some of the larger corporates should be aware of in terms of assessing their own choices, and also potentially projects that they'd like to get involved in to help speed up the process and sort of stabilize the economies and the countries of Africa?
Picking up the Great Green Wall example that you mentioned, I think that's a great example for really focusing our attention to what is at stake. The Great Green Wall and the countries of the Sahel are the region where we see a lot of out-migration, including migration to Africa, into other African countries, but also into the EU. People are leaving their farms, they're leaving rural areas because of land degradation, which is often an overlooked factor in the entire migration discussion. So it becomes also a question of regional stability and security, how we turn that tide and reverse that outflow of people from those areas. And here, generation restoration and the UN decade, together with the many partners who are working on the Great Green Wall, are making a concerted effort to change the narrative for the Sahel to also an area of opportunity, because there are many small and medium enterprises starting up in the Sahel that are producing sustainable foods, that are focusing on green jobs and the green economy. So I think the focus on flagship initiatives for restoration, like the Great Green Wall, is important. But of course, then within that, because this is a 8,000-kilometer long green corridor that is supposed to stretch across Africa east to west when it's done, and we're only about 15% there of implementing it. That is an enormous area. So within that, we need to focus on where can companies really help to make a difference. And that, of course, very much depend on what the company is and what their business is. If they are in the agri-food system and they need supplies, stable supplies of key commodities that come from that area, then investing in restoration of degraded lands, investing in agroforestry, but also investing in improving the socioeconomic conditions, especially of women in the Sahel, to ensure that there is the stability you need for long-term supply chain stability, is a good investment. If you're working in energy sectors, there's certainly no move towards restoration of ecosystems without at the same time an energy transition in Africa, because 80% of energy across Africa comes from firewood and charcoal. That is, in many countries, the #1 driver for degradation. So we need to combine this revolution for more carbon in soils and agroforestry with a decentralized green energy revolution. There has to be a solar panel on every house in Africa. There have to be decentralized energy solutions and energy storage solutions. So even for companies in that field, there are huge opportunities out there. And we need to see a leapfrog in Africa, same as with the telephone lines 20 years ago. We need to see countries leapfrog across an entire development stage into what is the latest in this field. So, for example, bypassing a heavy, often polluting, expensive, centralized energy infrastructure in favor of decentralized, green, renewable energy solutions is a huge opportunity for Africa.
I think that this is very, very exciting because, as you mentioned, this is an 8,000-kilometer long project. It will be the largest living structure on planet Earth, and it's something that's led by Africa, for Africa, as a sign for the rest of the world. And just listening to you speak and listening to these points that you're mentioning, there really is massive opportunity for every single industry sector to actually get involved and to help this, because we are also very aware as businesses, especially the larger businesses, that Africa really is set to be the final frontier in terms of growth and in terms of opportunity. And we have to protect the continent, because if we don't protect the northern regions of Africa, which is a very large space, the rest of Africa will be affected, and it will lead to instability. It will lead to migration. It will lead to so many different elements that will have a ripple effect on the people as well as on businesses. So if we have industry leaders now watching this conversation and feeling like they want to be part of something that is tangible, it's something that's, it's being built, it's going to be a long-term project, how would they get involved? How would they start working on these projects? Could you maybe give them a bit of advice in terms of how that process would be led?
So I'll give you a couple of possible options where they could start. So first of all, we work with the World Economic Forum, in which many of the companies that you work with are also organized, and they support something called the 1 Trillion Tree Initiative, or 1T.org. They also have a focus within that on the Sahel recently, and they run a number of things from tree planting drives to mentoring of young entrepreneurs. I think that's the second option where companies could come in. There's a real lack of small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa that succeed, because there's a lack of basic business skills, of training, of access to market, of access to capital at a small to medium enterprise level. So filling that void through mentoring, through impact investing, through venture capital is another area where it would be great to see more companies come in and invest. And it's not always investments of money; it's often investments of mentoring and capabilities, of capacity building in the business sector, especially in areas where we need to see more SMEs emerge, like in the food system, in the restoration of the Sahel. To give you one example of a project that others could join, with the International Olympic Committee, we started the Olympic Forest, which is a physical place in Senegal, which is within the Great Green Wall, to just set a symbol of how you could turn a landscape around, create employment, rural livelihoods through planting trees. But there are many such projects along the Great Green Wall where companies could join. We do have a digital hub for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, where soon we will list all those projects and activities. And in the meantime, we work with other partners who do some of that already. The World Resources Institute has a platform called terramatch.org, where interested investors could look up projects. They also sponsor small grants for new projects to be developed into sustainable or bankable business cases. So there's a number of options where companies could come into this space, both in a small and in a big scale. What is important is that we move from commitments to action, because everybody now says we want to be net zero by 2030 or 50 or whenever, but that's not good enough. What counts is what companies do, and they will be called out very shortly, actually, on listing exactly what they do, not some lofty, vague commitment of net zero, but what exactly are they doing? How does that add up to transformative change? How does that really bring down the emissions and increase sustainable investments?
100%. And we have a section coming in later in the paper, actually speaking to that specifically in terms of setting targets and setting commitments and really showing up and being active on that front. And I think the tricky space right now is, it's one thing to be setting these targets and setting these commitments, but on the ground, like having that action really take form, especially with projects that are going to take a longer time to really mature and to see the results thereof, while at the same time we're speaking to either the public or even the consumer. If you're a company, they are mostly this young generation that want to see immediate results and immediate responses to what you're doing. So I think it's finding the balance between those two that's going to be the tricky one for companies. But clearly there are some quick wins, as you mentioned, in terms of funding certain operations or getting involved with immediate responses. But there's also a long-term thinking that we can include there. So it's very exciting to think that, you know, there are big projects that are happening that we can make a really big difference to. And now I'm going to ask you a slightly trickier question. And so, Tim, now I'm going to shift gears slightly and ask you a slightly more tricky question linked to how NGOs communicate their efforts. Because out of all the main parties looking at government, NGO, corporates, and then the public consumer, we all have a part to play. And I really do think that NGOs have done a lot on the ground to get the needle moving. But you know, as a communication agency, there is often a gap that we've seen in terms of, you know, the great work that's being done and communicating that to the public to create mass scale behavior change. And so we wanted to just hear your thoughts in terms of, is there scope for more NGOs to maybe partner with more corporates from the communication side of things to really disseminate the work that's being done the way that we would disseminate the launch of a new beer or the launch of a new product? Because if we can, you know, campaign and sell millions of bottles of a new product, imagine what we could do with the power of mass media, taking that same sort of approach for concepts that really matter. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have a good example with World Environment Day, which happens every year on the 5th of June, and where often we have corporate partners who echo whatever is the message of that year, that theme. This year it was the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we, for example, have E.ON as one of our key partners who is supporting us with the launch of our digital hub. But you're absolutely right that there's a mismatch between what needs to be communicated and what there is money for to communicate. And I can give you one example that one of my colleagues working now in UNEP's communications division used to be a large advertising manager in the US, and with mainly 2 large corporate clients. She had a budget of $350 million a year to sell beverages and fast food. Now she has a budget of about $350,000 per year to save the oceans from plastic pollution. This is the mismatch of the importance of communicating what needs to be communicated to maintain our global civilization and the money that is available. So in general, I think it would be great to have this kind of collaboration where there's advertising space, billboards, public service announcements, commercials that are focused more on addressing the triple planetary crisis we're in now. It's the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse, and the global pollution and waste crisis. And we have clearly, we have many options for collaborating with you or your clients, but I think this becomes more and more urgent as we're running out of time, and in particular as climate becomes the most urgent of the planetary boundaries, but there are also others where we are pushing heavily against the planetary boundaries. The nitrogen cycle in our food system, for example, and biodiversity loss are not they're not less urgent than climate change.
Great. And I think there's a quote which I love, and it was the words of my favorite man, Sir David Attenborough. And he said how, you know, saving the planet is now becoming a communications challenge because we have the science, we have the manpower, you know, we have every tool essentially that we need to make this difference. It's just about getting the masses and the crowds to join us on that challenge and invite them on this journey with us. So thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. It's clear and evident that there are areas that we can collaborate on. And so for all of our clients listening to this talk and media owners alike, I think that, you know, we have a very big responsibility here to contribute. And there's definitely many exciting big projects on the ground in Africa that we can lead as a continent and contribute towards change. So thank you so much, Tim. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll be in chat soon to see how we can collaborate on communicating the next big project.
It's my pleasure. Take care.